He's already in Chennai. Dr. Errol, he's a professor. He's a president of one of his one of his companies in San Jose in USA, and he's author of the book also Better Defensible Decision. The concept what he's talking, I thought is very interesting. It'll be very useful to each one of us. So don't miss this. It's happening on 3rd of February, and Srikanth, managing director of speaker is Mr. Mohandas Pai. We got array of speakers. MD of Nestle India is there. We got Arun Kumar, who is black money specialist. Ajit Nanade, who is Indian economist, who will be talking on economy. We also have quite a bit on branding. Ambi Parmeshwaran from Hulka. Then we also got Judy, who is one of the finest valuer of branding in India. We also get the CEO of Dell is going to be coming and talking to us. We got some outstanding array of speakers. Mr. Nagesh, Shoppers Staff chairman. Along with him, we also have Venki Rajgopal coming and talking on a session. So, and in addition to Nestle chairman Suresh Narayan, we also have Swamiji, who is an IIT Madras. Then thereafter, went on to IIM Bangalore. Then he set up a beautiful ashram at the USA, making a great fortune for himself. And he's going to be talking about how to live, be happy, how to be successful in life. Swami Mukundananda, I don't know if you know him, he's going to be talking the validity session. Please do come, and we already have 500 plus nominations registered. We'll be closing the nominations very soon. Our capacity is only 700 at Taj Coromandel. Now, this is happening on 8th. 10th of Feb, we have again event corporate strategies in response to climate change, impact on businesses. Again, we have international speaker, Sheila Srikumar from Western University of Sydney. She will be here. Sheila Sriprakash, leading architect from Chennai. She will be chairing this session. Because we do that as a part of UNDP Sustainable Development Program at the you attend this event, I think it will be very useful. Suresh. Moderating the session, we have N. Ravi, Director of Indu, then Ravichandran Purushothaman, President of Danfoss, Nagappan, Stockbroker, Market Analysis, and Sheshai, who is Executive Vice Chairman of Induja Group, are the panelists. Please come and listen to them. I think it's always, I think I'll actually walk miles to listen to Mr. Jointly with the Indian Institute of Material Management. It is the Spectrum, the annual event. As a part of that annual event, MMA joined for the last session of the day, that is validity session. The influence of e-commerce trends in logistics. This will be joint event. It's happening on 21st of February at the same time. All the events, what I said, is happening at the same time, same place. All webcast live on YouTube and Facebook. You can watch them wherever we are. Then we also have on the 6th of March, we have also program lined up till April. Only one major event which you want to do, we always have a corporate governance day. So we have a corporate governance and enhancement, economic value enhancement. How the governance really enhance the value, and we are going to get some outstanding speakers. Former SEBI chairman and the former chairman of LIC. He has currently agreed to deliver the valid inaugural address. events. Coming to today's event, we are indeed privileged to, when Air Marshal Matheshwaran met me first time, when he said collaboration, MMA collaborates. Anybody want to collaborate to share the knowledge, we are there with them, anybody. And at the end of the day, MMA's job is to only take the knowledge wherever it's available and connect to the people who need them. And we are indeed delighted and privileged to collaborate with Peninsula Foundation and with the Air Marshal Matheshwaran was my Air Marshal, is an Air Force veteran, my colleague in the Air Force. It's always a privilege to collaborate with them. On another very, very important subject is going to be every quarter at least one discussion will be happening on these lines. Rise of India, managing strategies, economic and technological challenges. And we have got some outstanding panelists to be talking on this subject, share their insight, which I'm sure when you leave this hall at the end of the program, you will be much wiser, know quite a bit on this subject and rise of India. Always good. I never thought India is going to win today. How many of you thought India is going to win? See, that is the rise of India. That is one area is cricket, but we are also doing very well in all the areas. Ladies and gentlemen, you have put a hand together to welcome the moderator for the day, Air Marshal Matheshwaran, and he is a PVSM, AVSM PhD, Chairman, President of Peninsula Foundation. We also have distinguished panelists, Professor T.V. Paul, PhD, James Miguel, Professor of McGill University, Canada, General Raghavan, PVSM, UASM, AVSM, former DGMO will be joining us shortly, and Vice Admiral Kannan, retired PVSM, AVSM, VSM, Managing Director and CEO of L&D Shipping. Very welcome to you, sir. And Dr. Sundar Ramaswamy, PhD, is Vice Chancellor of Kriya University, one of the finest universities today in India. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to our distinguished panelists and the moderator. Yes. Gentlemen, put your hand together. Welcome General Raghavan, former Director General of Military Operations. He is another distinguished panelist. The format for this evening discussion is Mr. Matheshwaran will be leading the discussion. Let me have the privilege of introducing Air Marshal Matheshwaran, and thereafter he will introduce the speaker and discuss on the theme for this evening. Air Marshal Matheshwaran is a Air Force veteran. He is a founder, chairman, president of the Peninsula Foundation. He is also former deputy chief of integrated defense staff and tri-services and he is also deputy commander-in-chief of Eastern Air Command. The Air Marshal has also been active in service for over 39 years of Indian Air Force, commissioned as a fighter pilot in 1975. He has flown more than 40 types of aircraft with vast operational and research experience. He is graduate of Allied Fighter Weapon MPhil, PhD and Defense Strategy Studies, and also University of Madras. He is a senior fellow of alumnus of Howard Kennedy School, National School International Security Program. He is an executive council member of IDSA, an autonomous think tank of MOD, and he is also a strategic advisor. But what little I know, the Air Marshal is also a visiting faculty of Naval War College, Goa. He is also adjunct professor of Department of Geopolitics and Manipal University. You all know that armed forces people really study a lot. But I want to share with you one little about Air Marshal Matheshwaran. Air Marshal Matheshwaran is the commandant of ASD. And some of the finest fighter pilots who are test pilots only go on to command. He's really proud of Air Force. It's indeed a privilege to have you with us, sir. Now over to Air Marshal Matheshwaran to introduce speaker and take a subject. Over to
you. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a great pleasure to be here this evening, and I thank Vijay for enabling MMA to partner with the Peninsula Foundation to be able to put together a fabulous team of panelists for today's discussion. An extremely important topic, Rise of India in the 21st Century, and looking at how do we overcome the challenges, strategic, economic, and technological. Let me first introduce the panelists. Our chief panelist is Professor T.V. Paul in the Department of Political Science at McGill University, Montreal, and he's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Now, he is working on the book, and the book is a research study that's at the moment underway, and it's very interesting. Uh, TV Paul is very well known internationally. He's been the president of International Studies Association in 2016-17, and I've had the fortune of interacting with him on many of these conferences, and a pleasure to interact with him. He's also a very distinguished. He's the founding director of the Global Research Network on Peaceful Change, and he specializes in international relations, especially international security and South Asia. He received his undergraduate degree from Kerala in international relations. Los Angeles. And nearly 75 journal articles and book chapters, and has lectured at universities and research institutions internationally. In 2018 November, Professor Paul was inducted into the Royal Society of Canada as a senior fellow. In December 2009, his book, Power versus Prudence, is another book that was selected as an outstanding academic title of 2001 by Choice Magazine and as a book for understanding by the American Association of University Presses. In March 2005, Maclean Magazine's Guide to Canadian Universities rated Paul as one of the most popular professors at McGill University. And in 2005, he became the recipient of high distinction in Research Award by McGill Faculty Awards. In 2009, of the Center for International Peace and Security Studies at McGill University. And he's held strong visiting positions at Nanyang Technology University, Singapore, in Diplomatic Academy at Vienna, UC Berkeley, East West Center, Honolulu, APS Menon Visiting Chair for Diplomacy and Erudite Fellow at the Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam. Our next panelist is very distinguished military veteran, Lieutenant General V.R. Raghavan. He is one of the most renowned strategic thinkers of India. He was president of the Center for Security Analysis that he set up in Chennai more than a decade ago, and he was also director of the Delhi Policy Group. He was a member of India's National Security Advisory Board. He was also a member of the task force set up by Government of India to review national security. After a very distinguished career in the Indian Army, where he was decorated on 3 occasions, he retired as the Director General of Military Operations, and his combat experience includes insurgency campaigns. The General was an elected member of the Council of United States Institution of India and was a council member of International Institute for Strategic Studies, London. He was also a member of the Committee to Review Armed Forces Special Powers and he's directed many research projects. He's the author of many books, and his monograph on India's need for strategic balance is very popular. Dr. Sundar Ramaswamy, our next panelist, is a very well-renowned professional economist, an educator, an academic administrator within India and United States. He is currently the Vice Chancellor of Kriya University, an exciting new university initiative at Sri City. He received his PhD in Economics USA, MA Economics from Delhi School of Economics, and BA Honours in Economics from St. Stephen's. He is on leave from Middlebury College, one of the top consultants to UNCTAD, UNIDO, UNU, and World Bank. At L&T Shipping, degree in Electronics and Communication Engineering from Government College, Trivandrum. He did his MTech from IIT Powai and he also holds a post-graduation in management from Jamanlal Bajaj Institute of Management. Well, that gives you the fabulous credentials of the four panelists here. And we are at a time when, when India was a fairly 20 years as India was rising, and our economic growth touched more than 10% in 2012. And we've also, captured the imagination of the world. The first time when Goldman Sachs report on BRICS indicated that here are the emerging powers who will capture and transform the global power structure in the 21st century. Well, India has aspirations to be a great power, quite naturally so. If you read Discovery of India from Jawaharlal Nehru, which is written before independence, as a state with immense pride, as a civilizational state, that's quite natural for you to be aspiring to be a pole in the international system. So we do have aspirations. We are fiercely protective of our strategic autonomy, and these reflect in the behavior, in the policies, and in the interactions with international system that we've been doing. But there have been hiccups. The world is different. The international system is quite ruthless. It's Euro-American centric for the last nearly 400 years. And those who control the existing system will want to retain the status quo and will want to deny the rising powers to be able to contest their place, even share the power structure. How are we? Are we realistic? Are we pragmatic in our policies and in our approach? Is our growth faltering with looking at the current economic downturn? Are we looking at great power only as a matter of status symbol, and are we looking at issues which should actually be looked at more carefully in the context of democracy and governance, social ethics, the health of the societies, and people's commitment to ethics, norms, and morals? Are these the issues that really make a great power, apart from economic power, technological power, and military power? These are the issues that we actually need to look at and see where India will go in the next 50 years or 70 years in the 21st century. And I will request Professor Paul to give a presentation on the questions that he's going to raise, and then we'll ask the panelists to answer some of the issues that he will actually pose. Thank you.
Okay, so it can be done here too. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Air Marshal Mathishwaran. I must say, Air Marshal was very humble about himself. You all know his credentials, really impressive. What impressed me that he's very interested in our subject matter of international relations. So he comes to a lot of international conferences, spending his own money, I believe, and attends very meticulously. In fact, almost every panel I presented, he has been there asking very good questions. He's actually a very good ambassador for India in these places. I must appreciate that. It takes a lot of effort at this stage in his career to go to these things where all kinds of academic topics are discussed, international relations theory and strategic studies, whatnot. Anyway, so I appreciate your efforts, and I hope Peninsula Foundation will become the anchor, along with the Management Association, which I see already some of the best brains of Chennai are here. And I very much thank General Raghavan's presence here and the other two colleagues. General Raghavan and I met a couple of times. I don't know he remembers, but at the ORF, once I launched my book on Pakistan. It's called The Warrior State, Pakistan in the Contemporary World, which General Raghavan was one of the discussants. So I'm going to be brief because I'm still working on this project, and it is a continuation of a project that I did some years ago with another colleague, Baldev Raj Nayar. Some of you who study international relations must be aware of this book. It's called India in the World Order, Searching for Major Power Status. I'm not sure I'm getting this properly, but oh, okay. So at that time, we didn't have a lot of or other ways to understand it. It was around 2003, immediately after the nuclear testing. And we tried to capture a lot of this aspiration that Air Marshal mentioned. So it is true that India's elite leaders from Nehru onwards, there is a famous statement by Nehru in 1947 about India's civilizational power that Air Marshal mentioned. But today we have in Prime Minister Modi quite a bit of statements and the BJP party to make India a global power. So central claim is that security and prosperity are obviously key goals of any force, but there's something called international status. Status is an aspiration at this point, but it has come a long way. And of course, there are ups and downs in the outward presentation of this aspiration by different governments, but it is clear that this has been an underlying theme in India's development over the past 72 years. But as it was mentioned before, it has been a European-centric international system for the last 500 years or so. So the Europeans obviously did not want anybody else on it. Japanese tried to crash in, and with a war in 1904, 1905 with Russia, for a short period they were accepted, but then they were rejected. After World War I, the Versailles Treaty didn't give them what they asked for, and they became disenchanted, and that's one of the reasons why they ended up in that big war. But India made efforts. That was 1945 and 1968. 1945 is the post-war settlement. That's the creation of the United Nations in San Francisco, where India was unfortunately a colony, and there were supporters, but the British did not support strongly. So it didn't become a P5 member. Many people thought it could. Tested a weapon until 1970, I believe, was given the status of nuclear weapon states or non-nuclear weapon status. And if you look at the Indian struggle with that regime, the treaty, it was a status competition that resulted in testing. Didn't continue that program much, but 1998, another major test, and now a quasi-nuclear weapon state, accepted up to a point, but still not a member of the NPT or that regime as P5 members hold. So if you look at the international relations literature, there's a lot of reference to this subject of status, and those who study the subject in Machiavelli to Gilpin to even before that. And the Indian case is generating a lot of puzzles and interest all of a sudden because of this rising power phenomenon. So what is status? And let me just briefly define that using one of my own co-edited book. Collective beliefs about a given state's ranking attributes such as wealth, coercive capabilities, demographic position, socio-political organization, and diplomatic clout. So it is what others think of you. If you have status, others have to recognize it through, in the international system, through institutional, diplomatic means, and obviously invitation to every meeting, and a lot of attention to that country's policies. Now, the subject of great power, that is one of our, and some people call it major powers, some people call it global power, but I think this is a very European creation. Since the Treaty of Westphalia, there have been about 15 or 16 great powers. Many of them no longer are there. Spain, Portugal, Holland, even Sweden were considered as great powers. They are no longer there, often as a result of war and losing wars. So post-war settlement determined who is in the club. Status is a club good, or they call it club. And so what happened was that the Europeans defined this very much a military capability and economic capability. Then along with that came other. The world has changed quite a bit since especially since the end of the Cold War. So we have to look at comprehensive national power. Now, power and status are connected. So we have identified in the previous work some 10 elements of comprehensive national power. 4 are hard power, military, economic, technological, demographic. And then 6 are soft power, normative position in the world order, leadership role in international institutions, diplomacy, and national leadership. So countries, if you look at the world today, the P5 supposed to have at least dominant status in almost all of them. And obviously Britain and France are questionable, but we were just talking about the French clinging on to this by being as much possible as possible developing their strategic autonomy. Britain has a lot of this leftover power coming out of their imperial legacy. And obviously Russia, another country, if you look at the behavior of Putin, it is a status contest. He doesn't have much to fight with, so he's using his nuclear weapons, his diplomatic clout, etc., for achieving his goal. There is a changing notion of great power status today. As Air Marshal mentioned, it is not purely based on coercive power or military power alone, because you cannot use much of this military power to force others to oblige to you. But you need military power so that others won't force you to do certain things their way in pivotal moments. So it's a contest, but economic power matters a lot. I mentioned technology matters, demographic power. So that's where, if you look at all these elements, India was considered as, or is still considered as, a rising power, because it is perhaps after China, not many contestants there. The Turks and some countries like Indonesia sometimes make this claim, but they are not there on these 10 elements that I mentioned. So that's why India is not simply aspiration, but it is a big challenge how to get there. So we need to look at how do countries try to gain their status, and we have something called social identity theory, where countries try to push social mobility, social competition, social creativity. These strategies are sometimes contesting with other existing great powers. But India tried to play what you call social creativity, and that is essentially showing the diplomatic and a role of leadership in the developing world as an important player, especially without hard power, much of hard power. This was a problem because in the 62 war, India lost, and after that, that soft power declined as an important element, but maybe coming back at some point. So the unanswered questions: why do countries seek status? Now, we know that something comes intuitively, or is it because you have the attributes? Now, there is this general reasons are intrinsic psychological value. People want to be accepted socially. Even in your association, you probably, membership is a club good, I said, but it is also because when you are a member, you get certain benefits. Material benefits, increases resources, security, and power. And so then the question is that all? Actually, if you look at the behavior of Nehru and even Gandhi during that period, India sought higher status not because of purely for material benefits or some psychological value, but they thought it was a moral right to defend, to support the colonized world. So decolonization and then supporting the developing countries, especially against these Western imperial tendencies. And so the freedom struggle had a tremendous impact on the way they looked at the role India could play, even though it didn't have a whole lot of material power, especially the first several decades. Then this idea of civilizational basis, which is actually very much in Modi's talking too, but it's Nehru, he had already mentioned, India left indelible imprint on a quarter of humanity, a universal, reclaiming its universal history. So some of his stuff in the discovery of India, based on the civilizational, the book that I'm talking about. Now, I want to just jump to this idea whether India has made considerable progress in the 10 elements, especially since 1991. It was actually not purely of India's own actions, it was the international system that changed. So there was this tremendous opportunity. The twin forces, two things happened. First was the related subject. First was the end of the Cold War. So we were liberated from the Soviet model that was kind of pulling us down. And then the second was globalization, economic globalization. Of course, IT is connected to that. So that 20-year period that was mentioned here gave India an enormous opportunity, actually China too, to come out and become this great power or major power of the 21st century. And it has made many progress, as it was mentioned here, but it is still not there, which is the big challenge. How do you get there? And the reason is status is often a relative term. You have more of it or less of it. And who are you going to be compared with? Not Pakistan, but the closest peer competitor is unfortunately China, or fortunately. So that's why the problem. If you put China away, India has a lot of things to show, but it is when you show their achievements, I'm not a big fan of their political system or their the way they are putting people in jail and all that, but that's another question. We can raise that issue. So this comparative element is what makes, and if you look at China has made progress in all those elements much faster for various reasons. So what are the weaknesses in India? I mean, we have to talk about constraints. We won't look, I mean, I know people who do management, you have to see what is pulling you down, your company, if you are running a company. You need to see what needs to be done to make it a better company, for instance. So I kind of try to understand that. I think one of the biggest weaknesses is the capacity of the state, from the top till the bottom, that is the village, panchayat, or state levels. It is not necessary that a state has to be very powerful, but we need the capacity of the state to develop, implement policies to provide collective goods to the largest number of people and in a legitimate manner. And here I think somehow the state, when you talk about state, it is not the central government alone, it is at different levels. The state managers, bureaucrats, have not imbibed this notion of India's greatness. How do you, and connecting that to their own personal work. That's where the ethics issue comes in. So this is the difference with China. Again, I'm not praising them beyond a point, but the Communist Party has given mandates to the local administrators. Your work is related to China's greatness, China becoming a global power. I don't think that is happening in India. Maybe I'm wrong. Obviously, you could tell me. So when a bureaucrat in the local village collects bribes or does not move the file, he or she is hurting India's chances to become the next global power. That may sound strong, but unfortunately, I would like to know your reaction to that. The second is inclusive economic development. Again, Human Development Index, the Chinese have done enormously better, and that is a big challenge. And the third I didn't mention is the increasing internal divisions that we don't know where it is going to lead to. In terms of perceptions of others, it is not just perception of Indians themselves have on, but the perception of others on India, where it is heading. So let us quickly look at the status markers. And as I mentioned, there is tremendous progress, but then the question arises, is the military power, what is it is there? Is it borrowed or bought from somebody else? In terms of weaponry, can India produce some of these major, because no great power is a great power unless it can produce its own capabilities. Strategic autonomy actually doesn't come until you have your ability to create some of the top systems of the day. Economic, of course, that is the number one achievement over the past 2 decades, but again, right now, under challenge. Then you have this problem of demographic dividend. That was also considered as a big advantage, and I'm not sure where we are on that. So the focus on certain aspects of this technology, for instance, the space and nuclear were mentioned, but why not apply technology? That was kind of ignored in many ways. So as a result, those who travel in India, coming from, many of you do abroad also, we have not necessarily the best road system. And why is the engineer in charge cannot understand that the roads are built different ways, or drainage? Is there a problem there in terms of learning and adaptation? I'm putting all this as a thought process because I don't want to just glorify everything and go away giving you a very different impression. It is not that simple. We need to be critical of ourselves if we want to change. And I'm, by the way, interested very much in India's rise. So I want you to understand that. So international, India has made a lot of progress in the last 2 decades. Not completely, but if you look at where it was, the acceptance by the United States and others of the nuclear status, membership in various councils, in creation of its own institutions, including the relations with China-based institutions, and participation in a series of them, BRICS, G20, or the ARF, Asia, and all this create considerable opportunities for what you call peaceful acceptance of a rising power. And many people think that India may be a poster child for a peaceful accommodation of a rising power. China is already risen in many ways, but Chinese ambitions are what you call grand level, global level. It wants to replace the United States, whereas India has not made any of those claims, and it is not challenging the established order in any big way, except probably for China. And so this is, I've written about this subject. India's partial accommodation has been taking place through institutional means. And the relations with the United States is very pivotal here. The existing dominant power has to recognize if you ever want to get anywhere. And that has been one of the cardinal achievements, started with the Bush era, but Clinton, but Bush era saw that major achievement. Relations with China. This rivalry is a pivotal challenge, and India has managed it, what you call a managed rivalry, but it is not clear where it is heading, and we are also not sure what the Chinese ambitions are. But the Chinese are extremely clever, as they have come up with this Belt and Road Initiative, as you all know. That has offered them a chance to expand like the East India companies of yesteryears, peacefully, because they haven't militarized it yet. But the moment they militarize it, this will be a challenge, as the East India companies did eventually. So India has this balance of power, balancing a bridge power, or part of the hedging strategy. It can contribute to the balance of power, world order. Now, how far one has played that game, I don't know. But India has been making efforts to create what you call soft balancing. Again, I have a book on the subject. And hard balancing. Soft balancing is creating limited alignments or partnerships, and also using institutions for restraining power and threatening behavior. Hard balancing is military and alignment through alignment efforts. And so the emerging balance of power in Asia Pacific, many countries look to India as this pivotal power that can tilt or make sure the Chinese don't completely dominate the Asia Pacific order. Of course, the region is a big challenge for India, and it is returning again and again. And I have to say that the Pakistan problem is not going to go away, because Pakistan has been attempting to challenge India on the status level. During the Cold War, it was able to borrow a lot of this through its participation in the great power contestation. And then when the Cold War ended, for a period of time during the Afghan crisis, now of course Pakistan has been recognized as not as equal to India in many ways, but the Pakistani elite doesn't think that way. This is a big challenge. Then you have a bunch of weak neighbors which are actually playing a very different game today. They know that they have certain role in the balancing process, so they are able to attract quite a bit of resources from China and from India, which is very rare in human history. Weak powers, except for Pakistan, Turkey, Israel, and all that, but they are strategic players. The reason being that the rivalry is not yet intense. So they don't have to take a full position on anything. They can play this game between the two, and they are engaging in bargaining. And that bargaining has provided them quite a bit. And some of them are progressing probably better than India. In Bangladesh, I was told, has done better. So I won't go into other challenges, world image. This, by the way, can change. It's not like a permanent stuff. Governance challenges, of course, big ones, we mentioned already. Strategic culture, that's another subject that people who study Indian strategy has been, is there a strategy or is it more ad hoc? Is it, the Chinese seem to have a strategy to get there, whereas India seems to have strategy, but then it abandons the strategy or moves on to something else. So there is the transmission belt problem. How do you get this status when you don't have institutionalized status? I think that is a big problem in international politics. In the past, it was through wars and post-war settlements. Now that is unthinkable today. If there's a nuclear war, we all will be dead. So the question is whether we have this transmission belt problem can be solved through institutional means. And that is where India has and should actually put a lot of emphasis. But then some people think institutions are overrated. They may not have the kind of power unless you create your own, because the existing institutions are not open to the newcomers easily. I mentioned this elite challenge, which is, when I say elite, I'm not talking about the national elite alone. The national elite, many people who are serving in the government's top elite here, know that they have some ambition to make India strong, etc. But not, we go down in the list, is that the case? And I think that's a big challenge which has not been addressed. I mentioned the weak state syndrome. Then the other big challenge is why India has not become a proper developmental state. What is a developmental state? Developmental state is a theme that has come out after the success of Korea, Taiwan, even many of the Southeast Asian countries. These states put a lot of emphasis on human development, education. So at least 6% of GDP has to go to education if you want your people to have education. Unfortunately, in India's case, it has been 2%, 2.5, 3%, now I believe it's 2% too. Half of it goes to higher education, half of it to the other, as 1% each. Not enough to make a country great. So this neglect of education has affected India, and it will affect India for years to come if they don't rectify it. The demand is probably not there strong enough to make this. Of course, healthcare, a whole series of issues are related to education, hygiene, etc. So, let me just list a laundry list of things that India should do. Inclusive growth, education structure, infrastructure, some achievements are there, of course, health, hygiene, supply of drinking water, women and children status, civil society, and of course the hard power, military, make in India, economic power, technology, go beyond the 2-3 areas where India has done well, and using the demographic dividend, which will require a national effort to do a lot of things to get this youth out of their, get them jobs. And actually the youth is very, very promising. I've been to many colleges. Whenever I come to India, I go to colleges and universities. The most impressive thing is the young people. I don't see many here, but the point is, the young people are smarter than most of us from the older generation, including faculty. And unfortunately, are they getting the proper opportunities? I don't know. So, despite this picture I gave you, are familiar with all this, there has been achievements. Okay, one has to look at the US accommodation of India, the nuclear weapon status, the changing position of Japan, East Asian countries, Europe, even China. There's only so much they are able to push. Partly because of the economy. It was successful and looked upon as potentially a major economy. So perhaps it is a quasi-great power or major power already. Raw indicators matter. And I'm cautiously optimistic that India's integration as a power will be happening. But it will be slow because of the reasons I mentioned. And in a way it is probably better. Some say that it's better not to challenge outwardly the existing system. And then finally, I'll conclude by suggesting that anytime a country is involved too much in internal conflicts, too much about identity issues, religion included, it cannot focus on the big picture. It will be deflecting. And so, from that point of view, the current situation may not produce the outcome, at least some of them are hoping to, unless, of course, corrective measures are taken. And the economic change is obviously a big part of it. So these are just thoughts. I know people sitting here know a lot more about these things than I do. And by the way, again, I'm not trying to put India on the defensive, or so you have to look at it that way, that it is just to provoke some discussion, and perhaps, and it's not meant to be in any offensive manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, TV. That's wonderful. Okay. Let me now open out to the panelists, inviting their comments. And I think I'll pick up the points that TV mentioned about the changing markers of status, which is pointing to certain weaknesses in our system, which is the underlying weakness in the context of state capacity in dealing with internal conflicts or external conflicts and external relations, and of course, an inclusive economic development issues. So have you managed, particularly if you look at from 91, and we know the story before 91, the perennial Pakistan conflict issue, inability to resolve it once and for all, is that something that's pulling us down? Have we dealt with it effectively? Are we dealing with it correctly? And what's the future there? And of course, the economic issues and technological issues. So let me start with General Raghavan and invite his comments. Either way, sir. Either way you wish to.
Marshal Madhiswaran, Vijay Kumar, thank you, the MMA and the Peninsular Foundation for asking me to come and share my thoughts. I've read Professor Paul and known him and met him earlier. While he was speaking, a thought came to me. Is this presentation a point of view from Montreal? Is it from Washington? Is it from Maldives or Sri Lanka? Or is it just a very thorough magisterial survey from the academic, philosophical heights of what somebody like him has taught for decades and is writing a book on it? India looks different from Canada, from Latin America, from Moscow, and from Germany. If you travel in South Asia, you go to Nepal, or Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka, they will say, sir, what we admire most about India, they don't put it in so many words, but what they are saying is the soft power. Your Supreme Court. My God, if the Supreme Court says something, the government has to stand up and take notice. Your armed forces, they keep out of politics. But if a chief of a service makes a comment, everybody takes notice. Your IITs and IIMs, we have nothing compared to it. I was told last week that more than 5 lakh visas are issued annually to Bangladesh for medical work, for medical attention in India. You have to go to major hospitals in Chennai, which is a medical hub, where people from Somalia and Africa and Bangladesh and other places are permanently kept here as liaison officers. They know Tamil, they know English, and they deal with our doctors to facilitate their contingents of patients who come here for treatment. So which are we looking at, through which we are looking at India? Let me give you some parameters. I am a very strong critic of what happens in India. But let me also tell you that since independence, tens of millions have been raised above poverty line. In the history of humankind, have so many people been pulled out of poverty without having to send them to Siberia or gulags or ethnic cleansing, through a democratic process. Literacy has gone up. It may not be as people want it in the United States. There is massive illiteracy in the United States. Child mortality has improved. Longevity. It is not something to be just taken for granted and ignored. It has been a massive national effort which has made India what it is today. With that reminder of what India is, I must also say we are still one of the poor countries. We are only a developing country. People like Obama can come to our parliament and say, "You are not a rising power, you have already risen." Makes us feel happy. But we have a long way to go. So the professor is right in raising questions on why the great power status hasn't come to India. But the question is that the end of our ambition to have that status? Or is the removal of poverty, including 50 kilometers outside Chennai, the priority? And all that business of strategy and rising power is related to that. So let me start by saying, why this word rising power? Through history, every time there is a genuine rising, powerful state coming up, there is a conflict. If there is a rising power, existing powers worry and they do everything to keep it down. And that leads to conflict. And I don't have to give many examples of it, you know it all throughout history. China's rise scares people. Therefore, India rising also creates anxieties in some places. Power, are we a stabilizing power or a disruptive power? And this rising power all the time, rising. If you worry too much about rising, it will become like a souffle. You know what is a souffle? If it rises and before then the air goes up, it comes down. It's like our nearer home like the Pongal. It's only a means towards obtaining our ends. It is not so much status as the removal of abject poverty which still prevails, ignorance which still prevails. And in that field, India has done very well in the last 47 or 50 years after independence. Rising India, rising China. These are signs of anxiety in people's mind. And we shouldn't worry whether people call us as a major power or not a major power. What is the context? So let me start by asking you to take back your minds 20 years or even 10 years. The international order has changed from 2010 to 2020. The world has changed from 9/11, which occurred, to 2015, when a pandemic on coronavirus, for which we have no answers. Mr. Jaishankar, who is now a Minister of External Affairs, in a lecture in Singapore some time back said, the global order, the old world order, has run its course. We are living in another world, where even smaller powers can combine to hold back a major power. And as the professor rightly said, military power alone doesn't take you very far. The most powerful country in the world, with the greatest of weapons, all it can do is use a drone to assassinate a major general. Or it can send a drone in Afghanistan. Its major military capacity, and so is our major military capacity. The limits of military power have been shown up, and that is the major change in the world order. Superpowers which combine, Russia and the United States could combine and stop a war anywhere in Middle East or between India and Pakistan. When it didn't suit them, they could combine. And Lal Bahadur Shastri had to go to Tashkent. Today, the same superpowers are creating conflicts in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya. So the world order has undergone a change, a major change. And instead of a global order, there is greater global disorder. That is why in the shelves of the bookshops here you will find Shashi Tharoor's latest book, Global Disorder and India's Imperatives. In that context, what does rising India mean? The previous governments, and even today the Foreign Office will ask, what do you want as a rising power? The answer is, and should be, strategic stability and peace in which we can develop and remove the poverty in our country. Not be the number one in the world, but to do this is our ambition. That is why we need to have a capacity to rise. But what does the Prime Minister say in a lecture in Rising India Summit? Rising India signifies prosperity, pride, and determination. These are completely different phraseology than what was used in earlier time. So the world view of Indian leaders is undergoing a change. Therefore, if I have to summarize for you quickly the challenges, which is the subject which Madheswaran has given, in strategic terms, there are two levels at which we should see: foreign policy and military or defense. In military power, continuously you will read in the papers, Air Force does not have this, Army does not have it, Navy does not have that. We should buy this, we should buy that. We should. Because if you are weak and if you are not up to the mark militarily, people will bully you. But the point is that India is today the strongest military power in this region. There is no military threat to India other than irritants like Doklam or terrorist attacks or Pulwama. There is no existential military threat to India. And it is to the credit of the Indian political leadership that it has, in the last decades, created a military capacity which makes India secure. Nobody goes about the streets of India or the farms of India thinking that we are going to be invaded. Nobody can. But it's another matter. A father worries when his daughter goes to school or college whether she will have a problem coming home. So which security are we talking about? Our Navy is present all the way from Aden to Malacca Straits. We are part of the International Naval Force which is looking at the Somalian kidnappings and things like that. And the presence of the Indian Navy doesn't threaten anybody. Nobody is anxious. But if a Chinese ship comes, everybody is worried. We are not a destabilizing element. Sorry. I thought I had put it down, but there is obviously some crisis somewhere, not in rising power status, I hope. In foreign policy, the risk is when you have strong military power, you can have a militarized foreign policy. You think foreign policy can be conducted to your advantage by demonstrating military power. It is the pitfall all major powers have faced and have suffered, including the United States under Mr. Trump. Military power is an insurance, cannot be the instrument of foreign policy. So when we do, we have shifted. So if we do a Balakot, gives you great confidence and pride, but if you extend Balakot beyond, it will bring problems in its own case. So the point is, as a rising power, do we understand the relationship between military power, its limits, and the risks it shows and it throws up? It's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking I can have a military solution to many of my problems. Mr. Obama came to power and said, I will disengage. He could not. despite his best efforts, disengage from Afghanistan and Iraq. Mr. Trump, he's come to power and says, we haven't engaged enough, I will engage even more. And he's paying a price for it. So therefore, militarized foreign policy. The Chief of Defense Staff in a press conference, when he was asked about terrorism, he said the answer to terrorism is the US policy post 9/11. Should that be our policy? You ask yourself. And as a former military man, I raise my eyebrows on that. It is a militarizing foreign policy. So these are the risks and the strategic dimensions of military power that I am highlighting. An India which is militarily very strong and safe today runs the risk of crossing some Lakshman Rekhas. Huh? Yeah, right. Let me, 2 points and I will close. I feel that, and the professor quite rightly mentioned about internal cohesion, etc. No country which is at war with itself can be a power. And therefore, internal cohesion is very, very important. If we are not at peace with ourselves, we'll find it difficult to either have power or project power. And let me give you a quote from Subramaniam Swami's latest book, who is a member of the ruling party. His latest book is called Reset, Regaining India's Economic Legacy. Quote, over the next 6 months, there will be a big economic crisis in India as institutions are falling apart without any real efforts to hold them in place. What we need is a comprehensive macro model that will make every sector grow. And therefore, I would like to end by highlighting what the good professor mentioned about comprehensive security, comprehensive national power, which comes from a combination of all factors, military, social, technological, human, social, political. Unless we do that, there will be serious problems. So I think in terms of strategic dimension, I mentioned to you political foreign policy and internal cohesion as key ingredients of national power. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me invite Dr. Sundar Ramaswamy to comment on the economic issues and particularly the context of today's situation. And also, I would request your comments on is it a battle that's ongoing towards a transformation of the international financial architecture? Now we anywhere in part of either side in that?
And you gave me 5 minutes to do that? No, just kidding. So let me start off by first thanking Air Marshal Matheshwaran, Mr. Vijay Kumar, and the Madras Management Association. It's a very fascinating evening, and we can spend hours, but clearly we don't have the hours to spend. But this is a topic that India poses in all its dimensions of military, political, economic, social. Let me look at this from the economic lens, and I'll say a few things and pull it together and leave it for comments later in the questions. I agree with a lot of what's already been said by Professor Paul and Lieutenant General Ramana. You know, India, so I'm a student of development economics, and I study a number of countries. Most recently, I study a lot about my own country. But India is, I find, one of the most fascinatingly frustrating and challenging countries if I were to look at different countries around the world. Because as a country, we are a sort of a mini continent. And I don't have to tell all of you this. But from a study standpoint, it's because I find that we exist in the 17th century, in the 19th century, and the 21st century simultaneously. Many countries have moved on or they stay. And you see this in many parts of Indian life where you can go into a room and it looks like you're in a 21st century country. You go away 50 kilometers and you might as well have gone back 2 centuries. And this poses particular challenges when you're talking about Indian development because of the variability regionally, sub-regionally, sub-nationally, right? So keep that thought in the back of your head as you're looking at this country. The second thing is I think it's important to provide some context since the earlier 2 speakers talked about, the 21st century being not just a Pacific century, but also maybe India century. And it's an odd to talk about this today, a few days away from the budget, just having witnessed the lowest direct tax collection in 2 decades, the lowest growth rate in lots of time. But the problem is not to get fixated in the immediate, but looking at it with a little bit more of a time span in terms of why should people be bullish about a country, not just for nationalistic reasons or emotional reasons, but is there genuinely something about this country, right? So if you go back 3 centuries, and economic historians have documented this about the wealthiest region in the world before colonialism was the Mughal Empire. And India and China together controlled half the world's GDP, right? So in some ways, if that is your starting point, the last 3 centuries in some ways have been an aberration because we all know what colonialism did to us. But China is certainly well along on a civilizational path of reclaiming its position under the sun. And I think India will also follow suit. But I think it's important to remember that. The other thing, the comparison that gets made between China and India, and China is often the animal that's used to describe China as the dragon, the fiery dragon, the rising dragon, and so on. Occasionally you'll see the economist refer to India as a tiger. I prefer actually the elephant. It's a better metaphor for India, not just because of Lord Ganesha and because elephant is a friendly, nice animal, because elephants have momentum. They don't have acceleration, but once they get going, they can keep going. And I think Indian economy is very much like that. It's been growing in the last many years at 8-9%, but the momentum of the Indian society and Indian economy is something to be reckoned with rather than the speed at which it's been growing. In fact, when I was a student of economics at the Delhi School of Economics in the 80s, one of my professors, Raj Krishna, became quite famous for coining the very well-known phrase in those days called the Hindu rate of growth, because in those days, pre-1991, the Indian economy hardly grew greater than 3.5%, right? It's sort of the Hindu fatalistic way, is what Professor Krishna used to call it, and it became, the journalists would call it the Hindu rate of growth, because we never really grew past 3.5%. But next August, we would be marking 3 decades of India's economic reforms that were unleashed under P.V. Narasimha Rao's government with Manmohan Singh as a finance minister. And we forget the changes that have been brought in the last 3 decades, nearly 3 decades. And we have been witnessing growth rates of 7, 8, 9 consistently. It's only the last few 18 months to 2 years we have really stumbled. But I think we need to keep in mind in the last 3 decades, the Indian economy has actually done quite well. Now, the reason we need to do quite well is because our population is still not growing at 1%, which is the net replacement rate. So in real terms, we have to keep growing, otherwise we'll be falling behind in a real sense. And so in some ways, these all get tied between demography and economics and politics and society. If I were to look at it from an economic standpoint to address Air Marshal Matheshwaran's question, at the macro level, I'm looking at how do we measure macro stability? Do we have a stable macroeconomy? And for that, the measures I'm looking at are the growth rate of an economy, what is our inflation rate, and what is our debt, and then deficits. And along those metrics, if you leave, as I said, the last year or so apart, we have actually done quite well. I mean, in 1991, the reason we went to the IMF and the reason we were forced to undergo structural reforms is because we were not a very stable macroeconomy. In the last 20 years, a lot of what we have done is to create a pretty stable economic framework at the macro level. At the micro level, which is at the level you and I operate, it's the question of, are we dynamic? Are we competitive? Are we creating a dynamic macroeconomy which can be measured by the ease of doing business, which can be measured in what is happening to the quality of life at the average individual level, right? So what's fascinating about the economic question is I go back to a classical economist, Adam Smith, who's credited with oftentimes where the birth of modern economics starts, when he published his book in 1776 called An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, right? It's an interesting title. I tell my students about this. There's a reason it was not called the money of nations. There's a reason it's not called the income of nations, and it was called the wealth of nations, because ultimately what economics is about is what can you do with your resources. Money and stocks and bonds are all mere measures, but what really matters is what can you do with your hands, what can you do with your brains, what can you do with your land, what can you do with your capital, how productive you are, and ultimately at the individual level, are you better off today than you were yesterday? Is your child better off today than your parents were? And that's how you measure quality of life. And that's why at the individual level, we know whether we are leading a better life today than we were 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 50 years ago, right? So at the macro level and the micro level, they have to mesh together for an economy to be strong. And I think India has, in some ways, the Goldman Sachs report that was mentioned in the introduction, I think may have done us a disservice when we were clumped with Brazil and Russia and China as the BRICS, as sort of something grouping us to as if we were positioned and poised to take off. And we, as I said, we have in many ways, but then the last few years we have stumbled, and it'll be interesting to see whether this government starts to put us back on a trajectory, which is what ultimately I'm concerned about. I'm less concerned about what is happening in the month to month or the quarter to quarter. It's more the direction of where I think we are heading. And so in that sense, I think the optimistic self of me wants India to succeed, not just because I'm Indian, but I also think 1/6 of world's humanity, which exists in this planet, on this land, we cannot afford to fail, right? Even from a risk mitigation standpoint, you do not want a country with 1/6 of the world's humanity to suffer as it did if it had continued on a 3.5% growth rate, right? In terms of the jobs that it has to create, in terms of what aspirations people have, it needs a certain growth rate to satisfy the demands, right? When you look at the problems democratic countries have faced, and if you look at problems, constituencies that usually creates strikes and stoppages, it's usually students, workers, and farmers. And India has all three in huge numbers, right? So when you're trying to talk about, as my previous colleague said, about social cohesion and community, right? You cannot be a rising power, and one cannot hope to be a power if you're at conflict with yourself, right? So the sense of social cohesion becomes extremely important for us as students of economics when you're looking at how do you create a framework for macroeconomic stability and dynamism at the micro level so that industrialists and consumers feel like they have upward lifting standards of living, right? So in a traffic light analogy, where red is your dead stop, your economy is completely crashing and burning, and green is all signals are to go, we would have been at a flashing yellow. We are not quite at a green yet, because we can list all the problems we still have, and we have a ways to go. And I think that is really where I think we are today in 2020, a year away from the 3 decades mark of the reforms. And what, for me, and I'll stop with this without making a political comment, but I was asked to give a talk on the Indian economy about just after the elections. And my sincere comment at that time, which I still maintain, was that if the government gets a huge majority, so this was the day before the election results were to be announced. I said, if the government were to get a huge majority, and I said my rough calculation is we'll get 270 seats, so I was obviously wrong because they went past 300, but I said if the ruling party gets a majority, I really hope, because India needs a series of hard decisions to be taken on the economy, which every government since the UPA 2 has been kicking down the road. And I wish that the next 6 to 8 months, with that political mandate, the Prime Minister says to the country, and he'll have the backing of the country, to say we need to take A, B, and C of these reforms in order to position India to the higher growth strategy. Right? Now, of course, in the last 6 months, what has been of concern to me is that we really have not had an economic strategy. We have not created an economic blueprint. We have not talked about economic reforms the way economists would like them to talk about, like we did in 1991, which came about as a result of a crisis. And I always think when you react out of a crisis, you react differently than when you react out of strength. Right? I remember Steve Waugh, the famous Australian captain, said the Australians would change the team makeup when they are riding high, not when they're losing a series of matches, because that's the natural instinct. And I think if we had the mandate, which we did, to make the series of economic reforms that we needed, whether it was to address NPAs, whether it was to address banking reforms, whether it was to address structural reforms, how do you invest in infrastructure, there's a whole list economists have been writing about for quite some time. And then worry about social and political and other security issues. And as I'm a biased economist in this framework because I really think we were poised and we should have done this. And that's why I'm waiting for seeing what this budget is going to create, not so much for this coming year, but what's the blueprint? Because I come back with two final points. One, India needs a similar set of big bang reforms like we had in 91. Otherwise, I worry what the next few years will bring to us. And second, I end with my cautionary comment. We are too big a country to fail. If you look at the size of the population and the aspirations of the population and the neighborhood we are in, it is important that the economy understands both the security and the stability aspects. And that's why I feel until we get these things sorted, it'll be difficult to say that what we said quite confidently maybe 10 years ago, that 21st century, in addition to being China's, could be India's century. I think we have the potential, and I'm not saying this because I'm a proud Indian, but I genuinely think we have. But if we continue on the path of where we are for the last 18 months, I actually worry that we would have lost the game and we would have lost the script. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sindhu. Let me invite comments from Admiral Kannan in the context of technology issues, the weaknesses and strengths, and particularly in the context of technology sovereignty as a rising power. That's it.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Air Marshal Matheeshwaran and other co-panelists. To talk about technology is far more easy, I would think, because there's a clarity about what will happen in the next 10 years or 20 years, and it is a little more easily predictable than what Professor Paul talked about, status of nation and strategy, which General Raghavan said, and economy is anyway very complicated, as VC was explaining. So let me put 2-3 points across to you, which I think we need to really get concerned about, because it has got a direct impact on the economical growth, and there's going to be a challenge if we don't have correct approach for it. Definitely the industrial capability and the economic growth will depend upon how well you're able to imbibe technology. It could be through induction from abroad or your homegrown technologies. Either way, you should be able to get it in your machinery of the industries. The first thing which I would like to flag is I think we are going through a phase of a whole lot of disruptive technologies in industry. It started with, very simply, with our mobile phones some 15 years back, which has disrupted most of our lives at work or at home. And this is actually which has been largely strengthened by the power of digital communication. Now it has come into workplaces through artificial intelligence, through machine learning, and also bring Internet of Things. All these have already come into the factories, they come into production centers, they come into design centers, and you have a situation that you're able to execute your industrial centers with far more higher efficiency, and there is accuracy is much better in whatever you are trying to produce. But you have a challenge that you will require only less manpower. So induction of these technologies is going to bring in some attrition of manpower. We are already seeing it in India. I am seeing it in my own company, that the manpower is reducing because of these technologies are coming in. So we have a situation, there'll be less of blue collar. Maybe there'll be a marginal increase of white collar jobs in the company because they have to manage the digital infrastructure which is required to go along with it. Which means we need to look at, and this is going to stay, it is not going to go away. This disruptive technology, it may not be disruptive after some time, but at this point of time, definitely it's going to be disruptive. So there is a need for us to look into how, when we transit through this phase, a lot of our industries are still managing with legacy technologies, if I can say like that. And for them to go into disruptive technologies, you will find there is obviously some capital infrastructure required, but more than that, they need to look at how they can manage with the present quality and present skills of manpower. Which brings to a bigger issue that we need to look at our education process a little bit, because many of the graduates who are colleges are not employable at this point of time, straight away. You do require a fair amount of in-house training. You need to do some conversion, etc., to make them employable. I think this is something which needs to be looked at by educational institutions, by social engineers, to see how our either 10+2 students who are coming out or graduates who are coming out, how well they are going to be employable straight away, especially in phase of, because of this disruptive technologies. So I think that is something which we need to cope with, and we have a problem of people in the country, a large number of youth who are going to come out of the same education system, but the industries are going into a different way of working, and there's going to be a mismatch between what is available ex-colleges versus what the industry wants. I think this is something which needs to be addressed, and it's going to be a challenge. The second point which I would like to flag is that definitely there is an international pressure, as well as in the country also there is a growing demand for making our energy more clean. Most of the industries are trying to do with less of oil and more of the best fossil fuel is at the moment available is LNG. And you would have noticed that the consumption of LNG within the country itself is growing. And there's going to be far more LNG at the same time reducing oil. Primarily because the oil produces far more higher degrees of sulfur, carbon dioxide, and the environment deserves less of this. And to make sure that we preserve the environment, energy is going to become more and more cleaner in the years to come. There is already a prediction saying that the consumption of oil worldwide will drop by almost 15% by 2035 because of this change from oil to LNG. You have already noticed it in the automobile industry, what is happening. You go from BS4 to BS6, the production is dropped. And electrical vehicles are coming in to improve the protection towards the environment. So you will find that you will have this trend growing, and therefore the focus becomes to protect environment. And all of us need to look at how we can protect the environment in our own limited manner. The citizens should take care that they are able to help this movement towards protecting environment. In our country, there is already something started in a very simple manner, very modest manner called Swachh Bharat, but that is only at the moment for cleanliness. But I think it will slowly enhance itself from beyond cleanliness and go into conservation of energy, looking into energy becoming more green. There's already an emphasis on renewable source of energy. So this is going to be another technological challenge which is going to make economy strengthen. More so because many of the things which you want to induct from abroad in the form of, let's say, machinery, in the form of imports, even funds you want to receive from international organizations like World Bank, etc., they insist that you follow certain code in your organization, in your establishment, towards environmental protection. Then only you will get the items from abroad. So you'll be forced to follow that these measures are implemented in your organizations. General Raghavan talked about military strength and he touched upon Make in India. I thought he will talk more about it. So I will take this opportunity to combine with technologies. This is one area where definitely in the country there is a need for becoming more self-reliant. At the moment, we are not adequately reliant on this front. I just want to flag a point before I end. Very proud of our space organization, ISRO. The number of successful missions they have had, they almost landed the rover on the moon. It has been very good. If you look at atomic energy establishments in the country, there are more than 25 of them in the country. And they have a very creditable record of making sure these atomic energy power stations have been very safe and they have been very reliable in their performance. And they have met a lot of power requirements across the country. Even though it is only a few percentage now, 3 to 4% only power is produced on nuclear power plants. But I suppose it will grow after some time. So while space scientists and atomic scientists have been able to produce what is required for the country, I'm sorry to say that defense scientists have not been able to do it, even though all three of them come from the same cross-section of society. What is different in defense technology and defense scientists is they got a different customer. Both atomic energy and space energy, they are their own users of tech. As the developers. Same as for atomic energy, but it has not happened in defense. So I think there's something need to be focused on this to see where is the problem in this interface. I personally feel this interface is not working well, and I have seen it happening during my days in the Navy. So there's a need for us to make this interface work well. Then only you'll be able to be more independent. You will have homegrown technologies available, which will be more strong, and which will obviously give you the backing for the economic strength and the status which you are looking for. And it's not going to happen overnight. It may take you 5 years or 10 years, but if something is done today with some attention, I suppose it will happen in another 10 years. If you recall, the Prime Minister had started requirement from very high levels in the government which is symbolized by the lion, which you may all know. The symbol for Make in India is the lion. I am sorry to say that it is not roared yet in defense production. It has been a pathetic result over the last, and how we need to make more indigenous capability and self-reliance in the matters of defense. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. Let me actually open out. We're running out of time, and open out to the House for questions. We have about 10 minutes. Any questions anyone wants to raise?
Good evening, sir. I mean, it's a great experience listening to such an eminent panel. But my question is to Professor Sundar. Military, everything is very nice. I think most of us are worried about what happened economically. But the point I want to make is, you mentioned, sir, during your speech, that 1991 crisis almost imposed the developmental direction that both Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh had to pilot. And now the current crisis, or the 2015 crisis, if you will permit a very ordinary person to submit it to such a learned person as you, aren't the two crises different? One was where we had sold the family silver, one where we are selling the family. Would you want to comment on that, sir?
No, so the 1991, if you remember, we had gone down to a point where normally the rule of thumb is you're supposed to have cash in the bank to finance about 6 months of imports, and we are down to like 2 weeks. And that's why we were pretty much ready to mortgage our gold and get the loans, right? In some ways that was, and as I think Professor Paul said, there were two other factors that led to the fall of the Soviet Union in 91 August, and then previously the collapse of communism and the Berlin Wall. So all of that came and fructified for what led to this. And we reacted, and in a way it allowed the freedom for a minority government to do and put us on a path that in a way was actually very good economically, and followed through subsequently by UPA 1, UPA 2, NDA 1. Right? In some ways there was no crisis in the last few years. There was, in my view, that there was no crisis leading up to in the same magnitude. My point is, having finished politically a full term, which if you remember, we also have witnessed coalition governments going back to the 70s. And so no party really, or no government really finished its full constitutional term, and elections are costly both at the state level, national levels. So in a way, political stability was being given at a time when the economic blueprint can say we need to do A, B, and C to get us onto the next higher path. Sure, yeah.
It's an excellent point you're making right now. Narasimha's government was a minority government. Nobody wanted to rule there.
Right.
And nobody wanted to interfere, so they gave the freedom. Now we have exactly the opposite thing. We have a majority government.
Right.
More than 270
Correct.
estimation, where nobody wants it to function. Now the family is being sold. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
So if you see the 4.5 growth drop, as compared to 1.5 for Singapore and 3% for the United States growth for the same period, 4.5 is, the curve is, not very good. It was rising 10 and 12 post Goldman's and, Lehman's and other things, but then the whole world was rising. So what I'm trying to say is, you have $450 billion in the bank, even with your increased consumption and all that, it's well beyond your benchmark, term rule, 12 months. Without any income, I can now wait for the next job for 12 months. Something like that on a personal scale, right? That's where we are, and you as a master of macroeconomics, I'm a student, a very small student. But given that, political stability, by itself, does it give you the freedom to create economic stability?
Okay, can we keep it short? The others will have to. Yes.
There's been a lot written about whether democracy has cost India 2% growth rate because, unlike an authoritarian government, we have to satisfy coalition partners, all of that. There's been a long literature about politics and economics coming together. My point comes back to, we have an opportunity when we were doing quite well under NDA 1 in terms of the growth rates. In terms of the growth rates, we need to sustain this economic growth. And we have lost our script in the last 18 months. At a time when politically we have the mandate, and it takes statesmanship. As they say, I don't know who said it, but a politician lives for the next election, a statesman lives for the next generation. You need a statesman to say, the Indian economy is poised, and if I want to make it a $5 trillion economy in the next 5 years, we need to do A, B, C, D, E. You have given me the mandate. Please bear with me to do A, B, C, D, E, and then alone we will get on the higher growth path. That is really what the point of the economist profession is. And instead, we have not really done that, and we have focused on other issues, fair enough. But now, there's no way we are going to reach a $5 trillion economy. There is no way the growth rate is even getting back to 6, 7, 8%, because I don't see a blueprint. You see what's happening in the industry, you see what's happening in agriculture. And that is really the worrying point for me. And a country like India, when it's at a lower level, can reach 7, 8. US will never grow at 7, 8%. It'll grow 1.5, 2 or 3%. And we need that because we have, just at a very another way to put this, we need 12 million jobs a year because we graduate 1 million students across all universities. We produce 4.5 to 5 million jobs. Educated, unemployed students in a democracy is a tinder box waiting to cash fire. So my point is, part of the reason for why an economy needs to grow, as I said about providing quality of life, is you start with the simple, roti, kapda, makan. I need a job, I need a house, I need all of that. That is what we are now really in the danger of mortgaging. When we were doing quite well till about 2013, 14, 15, 16, it's only the last 18 months when in a group of 16 largest economies, we have now become the 15th worst performer. I think England is the only country that's worse than us. And that's not a good company to give in, given what you read about Brexit and all of that. So the point is, when you have the political mandate, do you translate that to create the economic blueprint that you need to become the $5 trillion economy? Because that's also the aspiration of the government. And that's really what we are needing to see.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Manjari? Yeah.
So keeping the politics as a constant, my question is a little going beyond, taking from Vice Admiral Kannan sir and Sundar Ramaswamy sir's presentation. It's about the economic security. You were mentioning about the economic blueprint, right? Like sir said, there is a skill mismatch. Definitely there is a skill mismatch. So I'm looking at, say, 30, 40 years down the line. We have a lot of unemployed. We are right now in a demographic dividend. So if we miss this opportunity, what is the cost that we're looking at in future? So 30 years down the line, what are we going to do? We have the policies, and do we have the right policy reforms and measures that's been done to look at 30, 40 years down the line? Because we'll be having a lot of old people. Your dependent population is more. Right now we have more of working age population. Your average age is 27 years. But what about like few years down the line? Are we prepared for that? I mean, that's like really more concerning as an economic student for me, because we don't see any kind of blueprint or any kind of policies right now being made. I mean, that's it. I just want your comment on that.
You want to comment on that?
What is the policy changes required to make the youth more employable? That's what you meant.
How will it in the future, 30, 40 years down the line, when the dependency population is more? Right now we have workers' population. Right now we cannot manage the demographic dividend. What will be the cost of it in future?
I won't be able. I think economist is the best person.
Simple answer is we don't. We don't have a policy yet, and that's my biggest concern. I mean, you already heard about Make in India, Skill India. I mean, we have the statement, but to me it's beyond the rhetoric. How do we actually implement it? Do we actually do something about it? I want you to pay attention to one of the statistics I think Professor Paul said. We are one of the largest economies that has consistently underinvested in education since independence. I think he quoted a figure of 6% or something. I would be happy with 4 or 5% of GDP if we could do this. We have consistently invested 1.5 to 2%. And that is cumulative. because a kid takes 12 years to get out of school, takes another 3-4 years to get out of college. So those pressures add up. The underinvestment in education, unlike other developing countries, especially in Asia, which put a lot of emphasis on education. But the other thing that I mentioned about the ease of doing business, right? So you can be an entrepreneur. You don't, I would say, have to always look for the government for a job or the private sector for a job. But it gets back to our ease of doing business. And we have hardly moved up in terms of the ease of doing business, in terms of making it possible to even if you want to be self-employed, ask yourself the question, where is the talent which exists in raw nature, in sort of the raw potential of the demographic dividend that you're talking about? But how easy is it to still set up a job or a business today? How easy is it to exit a business today? So these are all the ways in which the government can make it easier. We won't even open the door on corruption yet, where India doesn't do very well on corruption. But the point is, this is what I mean by saying, are we doing everything to make the microeconomy dynamic so that companies can hire and fire, individuals can join and exit, banks can lend loans without political pressure, so that the economy is thriving at the micro level that you and I actually feel it. I'm able to get jobs, I'm able to afford a home, I'm able to get married, I'm able to send my kids to college. Those are things which is where I would measure progress and quality of life. So it's not enough to say we have 50% of the world's population under 35 in India, because very quickly those same, as I said earlier, the educated, unemployed youths feeling the sense of frustration and lack of aspirations is not a recipe for social stability.
I just want to make a quick general comment that the problem, at least from these two interesting presentations, is that India is mostly a reactive state. It's not proactive. Yes. So crisis, let me respond and I'll give you a chance. I don't need to take over. The problem is crisis is the mode when political elite often function pretty well in India. You know, when you have a big crisis, we are very good at managing or trying in the military crisis too. So what do you have to do? We talk about grand strategy. Grand strategy is no longer military strategy, okay? It is about all these elements. National strategy, how to grow, how to increase security, how to increase prosperity. And just about technology, I am puzzled why India is not focusing on those technology where it could, AI, solar, maybe you can list the ones that where it has a strength, you know, you can definitely. And if I were a decision maker, I'll put some serious effort into, just like IT did, the next technologies, and learn from countries like Singapore. I mean, not easy to imitate. They have a plan for 20, 30 years, exactly what you're saying, how to deal with the demographic changes, a comprehensive national plan, and that is absolutely necessary if you have to deal with these issues.
Thank you. We'll just have last two questions and no explanation, just the short question. Give the mic, please.
Well said about the reactiveness of the Indian society as such. Right from independence in 50s, when we had the food insecurity, we started with our programs of Green Revolution and Operation Flood and
So we are running out of time.
Just 1 minute, sir. 1 minute.
Yeah.
60s, we had the foreign aggression. We started with our ordnance factories and all these areas, and we started strengthening. 70s, petrodollar issue. 80s, political, we were all with a begging ball. 90s, political instability, as you said it. It's been all along more on the reactive area than on the strategic planning right from the beginning. Now only we started thinking in a systematic way. We want to develop ourselves with 5-year strategy, 10-year strategy, 20-year strategy of the developed countries. We have been more on a crisis situation, and even now today with such a political mandate, we are not in a position to clearly say, what's the way to go for? You want to rise? You want to be the superpower? No. You said it. I want the food for the people on the road. You want to develop the common man. You said that I want security. These type of issues are being attended right now. Unless and until we think all those issues, Simultaneously, we are working on that. By the time we complete
Okay.
our thought process on
Thank
these
you.
issues,
Thank you.
we will
Let me
do
get on
that.
to
Thank
the-
you very much. It's
Thank
okay.
you. Yeah, Ramesh, last question.
Good evening, gentlemen. I've come all the way from Sri City, and I'll be driving back to Sri City. But I think it's an evening that I couldn't have spent better. My question is to Vice Admiral Kannan. I served for 30 years in the Air Force, a part of which I spent in the PMO and part of it in DRDO. You raised a very moot point about the atomic energy and ISRO being clients of its own products, being doing better than DRDO. I agree DRDO is not exactly United States DARPA, but is it because atomic energy and ISRO also come directly under the PMO and DRDO comes under a bureaucrat in the Ministry of Defense? Your comments, please.
I basically feel DRDO is not able to deliver adequately. They are delivering something, but not in good time or with at the cost at which it is planned. Essentially because this interface between the designer and developer and the user is not very effective. I worked in DRDO for 4 years, and I realized that the organizational goals of the DRDO and the requirements of the users, they don't converge on time. Because something is going a little slower, that requirements keep changing, and you find that they are not able to converge so that the product can get finalized. It is sad, lots of thousands of crores are going away in this manner. And finally, we find a solution to go and import, paying almost at double the cost, and we bring it to India. There is a need to bring about this, and I think Marshal Matheeswaran is the best person to answer this. This is applicable to public sector also, why HAL is not able to meet most of the requirements of the Air Force. But there are some examples where the leadership has got changed and it has got driven in a different manner, and there are some examples of how some projects have been delivered. But the fact is, this is definitely an area where they should look at some way of reforming it. And I have only one solution for the time being. DRDO should be asked to look at only strategic issues.
Absolutely.
And all things pertaining to tactical issues. That means tactical means guns, missiles, some radars. They're all of tactical nature.
The private sector can.
They need to be given to the industry. Now, the industry can be public sector, industry can be private sector, whichever it is. But this government machinery trying to do this development and trying to generate something, I think it has been a bad exercise and has not produced commensurate result. And I think we should get this thing changed.
Thank you, Admiral. Technology is the crux of ultimately the power that we are talking about, and even the economic development we are talking about. To sum it up, it can be a subject for a whole day's discussion separately. But to sum it up, I think we don't have a coherent national technology strategy. That's a problem. Let me now, we are running out of time, and therefore let me now request each of the panelists, starting with TV, to give us summing up in 1 or 2 minutes.
I think I must say this has been a very useful exercise for me, and you were candid enough that, and even questions, nobody was trying to generate a political turmoil here. I think more candid discussions are needed at the governmental level, at bureaucratic level, political level, as a societal level, accepting failures, look at what we need to learn from others. How can we transform, all for the betterment of this magnificent country?
In fact, I totally agree with Professor Paul, what he said. Many of us know there has to be very synergistic progress on, be it economy, be it technology, be it education, be it health, and so on and so forth. I think a grand vision is not somehow coming out from government machinery, saying this is how we will have this country's program for next 10 years. And if that can come out in some manner. I am not aware of such a document. I don't know whether you have seen. At least I don't get to read in the papers about such things which the government has set upon for each of this area, other than the manifesto where it speaks about what the parties want to achieve. I think there's a need for making citizens more aware. There are 100 people here and only 10 know about it. That's not good enough. More people need to know about it by better discussions and dissemination of such programs.
I think, thank you for the questions. I thought the questions were very interesting and we could have stayed on a bit longer. I think my only closing comment is, as I said, about the metaphor for India. I think elephants have stamina, elephants have momentum. I'm an optimist. I do think, while I don't think there is any grand vision document, I'm not even sure we need a vision document. I would rather create a framework and let natural people's talents flourish. But we need that, absolutely. Otherwise, the alternative is actually very grim. And so I'm still hoping and that in the next few years we will get that to achieve what we want to achieve as a society, as an economy. And that's why I use the elephant as a metaphor. And I do think it's possible, as I started my talk by saying, the Mughal Empire was the richest empire in the world. Then happened colonialism. It's possible, without being jingoistic and nationalistic, that India has the potential to reach that status of the wealthiest country in the world in the next 80 years. The last point is, I'm an educator. I have graded thousands and thousands of papers. I'm always troubled when I see a student who could get an A grade and gets a B. And that's how I rate India right now. So it's a potential that I think is deserving of an A, but honestly and critically assessing, we'll have to give it a B- or a B right now. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I think to sum it up, I think what you said is absolutely right, and I picked on the education. If I consider why US is the hegemon and superpower, their strength, I wouldn't look at their military or their technology, it's in the education system. And unless we reform our education system and bring in that as your core strength, everything else will be easy to achieve. And ultimately, India needs to be a great power. Power is necessary not primarily as a status, but to be able to get what you want in an international system that is ruthless. And you've got to have wield that power. And for that power, you need strategic control, you need technology control, technology sovereignty, and economic power and economic sovereignty. Thank you very much, and please give a big hand to our panelists. They've done wonderfully well.
Thank you. I think it's a fascinating, thought-provoking evening. We all enjoyed it. I think in the 28th of April, we are doing a national conclave on India 2025, Aspiration to Action, where we are getting the Finance Minister, Jay Panda, a couple of outstanding political and corporate leaders. I think we'll have a feast of the time. It's happening at Taj Coromandel. Just to tell you, once again, big round of applause to our distinguished panelists. And may I request Atesh join me? I think we'll present a memento on behalf of MMA as well as Peninsula Foundation.